Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive.
Mm.
We're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today. We're looking at the impacts of this trade war.
Hmm.
And a lot of you have been asking for actionable insights, ways to, fix things.
Hmm.
And while we won't be offering solutions today, I think understanding the problem
Yeah,
is really the first step
absolutely.
to taking effective action, wouldn't you say?
100%. I think sometimes the most practical knowledge you can get comes from really, grappling with the problems that are in front of you.
Exactly. And to grapple with those problems, we've got a fascinating mix of sources for this deep dive. We've got news clips, we've got expert analysis, we've even got some firsthand accounts of how this trade war is playing out on
Yeah.
the ground. So
It's a
it's ready for some pretty,
it's a stark reminder that these aren't just, abstract economic concepts. These have very real human consequences.
yeah. All right, so let's start with the ripple effect across industries.
Hmm.
In our research, we came across this story about a Canadian auto parts manufacturer.
Mm.
And they're facing, get this, dwindling orders and the possibility of layoffs, all because of these tariffs. What's your take on that?
Well, this story it really highlights the fragility of these global supply
All
chains.
right.
Because it's not just about the finished cars that are rolling off the assembly line, it's about the intricate web of suppliers, the raw materials, all the
Uh-huh.
components, and these things are all flowing across borders.
Right.
And when you disrupt that flow,
Yeah.
you see the consequences up and down the line.
And it's not just the auto industry, right?
Mhm.
It seems like all sorts of industries are being affected in really unexpected ways.
Absolutely. The interconnectedness of the global economy means that even industries that you wouldn't think would be affected by a trade war end up feeling the pinch.
Yeah. And what's really alarming is the speed at which this is happening.
Yeah.
Some of the sources that we came across suggest that some key industries, like auto manufacturing, could be looking at shutdowns in as little as 10 days. That's fast.
That's the danger of these interconnected systems.
Right.
What seems like a small disruption in one area can quickly cascade, like dominoes falling into a full-blown crisis.
Right.
And we're not talking about some kind of hypothetical future scenario.
Yeah.
This is happening now. Like the clock is ticking.
Okay, so industries are being hit hard. The impact is happening fast. But it's not just the economy that's feeling the pressure. We're also seeing some pretty significant shifts in consumer behavior.
Right. We're seeing this sort of rise of nationalist sentiment.
Mm.
This idea of like buy local
Right.
is gaining some momentum. In fact, we even saw a story about a major Canadian retailer pulling American products from their shelves entirely. So,
Whoa. That's a bold move. I mean, that makes you wonder, is this just like a temporary knee-jerk reaction, or are we witnessing a more fundamental shift in consumer loyalty?
it's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say for sure, right? But you have to think, if consumers are forced to find these alternatives, whether it's different brands or different products, and if those alternatives meet their needs, will they go back to their old habits,
Right.
It's possible that this trade war could end up accelerating a shift in brand preferences and purchasing patterns, and that would have long-term implications for businesses on both sides of the border.
Yeah. And speaking of long-term implications, that brings us to the big elephant in the room.
Right.
We got to talk about economic uncertainty. I mean, the stock market has taken a massive hit. We're talking trillions of dollars in lost value.
Trillions. It's a clear indication of how nervous the markets are. This trade war is just injecting this huge dose of uncertainty
Yeah.
into an already volatile global economy. Investors don't like that, so they're reacting accordingly.
Yeah. And it's not just Wall Street.
Right.
It's like Main Street, too.
Exactly.
I mean, there are growing concerns about inflation
Mhm.
and the rising cost of, just everyday goods.
Absolutely. When you have tariffs, that drives up the cost of imported goods.
Right.
And those costs, eventually, they have to go somewhere, so they trickle down to the consumer.
Yeah.
We're talking about everything from your groceries to the gas you put in your car.
Right.
And this hits people's wallets hard.
Right. So essentially what we're saying is this trade war isn't just some abstract economic concept.
Yeah.
This has very real implications for people's purchasing power, like their ability to just make ends meet.
It absolutely does. And the consequences could be particularly devastating for those who are already struggling, We saw reports of a major Canadian retailer facing potential bankruptcy due to the added economic pressures of this trade war, and that's a household name.
Wow.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that this isn't just about political posturing. It has real-world consequences for businesses, workers, and entire communities.
And it goes beyond just the pure economic concerns as well. This
Yeah.
trade war is putting a strain on international relations. The rhetoric is becoming much more heated. One of our sources even quoted a Canadian politician accusing the U.S. of wanting to annex Canada.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay. That's a pretty loaded statement.
Yeah.
It sounds like, I mean, from what you're saying, the traditionally friendly relationship between Canada and the U.S. is taking a serious hit.
There's no question about it. And the long-term consequences of this diplomatic fallout could be quite significant.
Yeah.
Reduced cooperation on things like security and intelligence sharing
Right.
could have really far-reaching implications for both nations.
Yeah, it's almost as if this trade war is creating this rift
Hmm.
between these two countries that have historically been so closely aligned. And it's not just the governments, it's public opinion too, right?
That's right. Our sources indicate that Canadians are viewing the U.S. in an increasingly negative light.
Yeah.
And this erosion of trust and goodwill is incredibly difficult to repair. It could have long-lasting consequences for the relationship between our two countries.
So we've got industries on edge, we've got consumers changing their habits, we've got the economy teetering on uncertainty, and now we've got international relations in turmoil. But it doesn't stop there, does it? This trade war is also having a very real human cost.
You're absolutely right. Behind all of the economic indicators and the political rhetoric, there are real people whose lives are being deeply impacted by this situation. We came across a story about a family that was rescued while attempting to illegally cross the U.S. border into Canada. They were driven by desperation and economic hardship.
That's just heartbreaking. It's a stark reminder that these seemingly distant political decisions, they can have these really devastating consequences for individuals and families.
Absolutely. And it forces us to confront the very real human cost of these political actions. It's easy to get caught up in the economic arguments and the sort of big picture narratives, but we can't forget about the people caught in the crossfire.
It's easy to forget that these are people's lives, their livelihoods, their dreams, and it's all being upended by forces beyond their control.
Yeah, and this isn't just limited to, border crossings and things like that. Our sources point to a rise in social unrest and economic migration within Canada as well.
Mm.
People are losing their jobs, prices are rising, and some are feeling desperate enough to make some really drastic choices.
Like this trade war is just shaking the foundation of society. It's exposing all these vulnerabilities that maybe we didn't even realize were there.
You hit the nail on the head. It highlights the fragility of our interconnected world and, what can happen when those connections are disrupted. The consequences are often far-reaching and very difficult to predict.
So we've got industries struggling to survive. We've got consumers shifting their loyalties. The economy's on shaky ground. International relations are a mess. And real people are facing real hardship. It paints a pretty bleak picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a complex and challenging situation, to say the least. And the reality is we're just starting to see the real impacts of this trade war. It's like we dropped a pebble in a pond and the ripples are still spreading outwards.
So it's clear that this trade war is a big deal. But I think the question on a lot of people's minds is, why should they care?
Yeah,
What's the takeaway for the average person listening to this right now?
that's a really important question. I think the most important takeaway is this. We live in an incredibly interconnected world, and political decisions that may seem distant can have very real, tangible consequences on our daily lives. This trade war is a perfect example of that.
Absolutely. It's like we're all connected in this giant web.
Yeah,
And when one part of the web is disrupted, the whole thing shakes.
precisely. And the trade war highlights the vulnerability of those connections. It's a reminder that we can't take our economic stability or our international relationships for granted. We need to be more aware of how these things are interconnected and how our actions impact one another.
So what does this all mean? Where do we go from here?
That's a tough question. There are no easy answers, but I think it all starts with awareness. The more we understand about the complexities of this trade war, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions about our own lives. Whether it's our spending habits, our political engagement, or simply our understanding of the world around us.
It's like we can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend this isn't happening.
Exactly. We need to be informed, we need to be engaged, and perhaps most importantly, we need to be compassionate. This trade war is impacting real people, and we need to be mindful of the human cost of these political decisions.
It's so easy to get caught up in the numbers and the rhetoric, but at the end of the day, this is about people's lives, their livelihoods, and their futures.
That's right. And that's something worth fighting for, whether it's through political engagement, community support, or simply spreading awareness and having these conversations.
So even though this deep dive has been pretty heavy so far, it sounds like there's a glimmer of hope in there.
There always is. Humans are incredibly resilient, and we have a remarkable capacity for innovation and adaptation. I believe we can find solutions and create a better future.
But it's not going to be easy, is it?
No, not at all. There will be challenges, there will be setbacks, and there will be difficult choices ahead. But I truly believe that by working together, staying informed, and advocating for those most impacted, we can navigate this storm and emerge stronger on the other side.
I love that, navigating the storm together. But it's not going to happen overnight, right?
It's a long game. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to engage in constructive dialogue, even when it's tough.
Especially when it's tough. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and it's clear that this trade war is having a ripple effect on pretty much every aspect of our lives. But before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, is there anything else you think the listener should know? What's the one big takeaway you want them to walk away with?
That's a good question. Let me think. I think in light of everything we've discussed, the biggest takeaway is the profound interconnectedness of our world.
Hmm,
This trade war, while specific to Canada and the US, it's really just a small example of the larger global system we live in.
right.
It's a stark reminder that actions taken in one part of the world can have far-reaching consequences, both positive and negative.
Yeah, and, it's so easy to feel isolated in our own little bubbles.
Absolutely.
But the reality is we're all part of this complex global ecosystem. And I think, from what we've been talking about, we have a responsibility to be informed and engaged citizens of that ecosystem.
I completely agree. And that responsibility, it goes beyond just understanding the issues. It's about being compassionate. It's about advocating for those most impacted. And it's about working towards solutions that benefit everyone, not just ourselves.
Okay, so I think that's a great place to pause for now. It's been a bit of a heavy deep dive so far, but I think we've uncovered some really important insights into the very real consequences of this trade war. And more importantly, we've highlighted the importance of awareness, engagement, and compassion as we navigate this complex situation.
I think you're right. And it's important to acknowledge that this conversation isn't over yet. There's so much more to explore, so much more to learn, and so much more to discuss.
Exactly. And we encourage you, our listeners, to continue your own deep dive into this topic. Stay curious, ask questions, and be an active participant in shaping the future you want to see. It really does feel like we're all just standing on this shaky ground, both economically and, socially. And, one thing that I find striking is just how these global events, like these trade wars, they can trigger these really personal and individual struggles.
Absolutely. It's a chain reaction.
Yeah.
You start with the trade war, and that creates this economic pressure, and that leads to things like job losses. You have
Yeah.
financial instability, and ultimately people are put in really difficult situations.
And we can't ignore that human cost.
Mm.
The human cost of these political decisions, it's not just numbers and statistics. It's about, like real lives being completely upended.
The sources really do paint a very, very sobering picture of how this trade war is actually fueling this social unrest and also economic migration.
Right.
You have people that are being displaced, both physically and economically.
Yeah.
And that's creating this ripple effect of just uncertainty and instability.
It's almost as if we're witnessing like this slow motion societal shift
Yeah,
with the fault lines running along, these economic and political boundaries.
that's a great way to put it. This trade war is almost acting as a catalyst. It's exposing these vulnerabilities that exist within our social fabric, and it's forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about inequality and, the distribution of wealth and things like that.
Right. And it's so easy to get caught up in the political rhetoric and these economic debates and all that stuff. But we really need to remember that at the core of all of this, this is ultimately about people's lives.
Precisely.
Hmm.
We need to look beyond the headlines.
Hmm.
We have to look beyond the statistics, and we need to actually recognize the very real human suffering that's unfolding as a result of this.
So I guess the question then becomes, what does this mean for the average person? How can we grapple with these really, these dramatic impacts? And how can we actually make sense of this incredibly complex situation?
I think it starts with awareness. We need to educate ourselves about the intricate web of interconnectedness that truly shapes our world. And I think it's important to understand how, these events that might seem very distant, how they can actually have these really profound consequences right here at home.
Yeah, it's like that saying, think globally, act locally.
Exactly,
But
exactly.
I think in this case, it's more like, understand globally, but really feel it locally.
Yeah.
Actually feel the impacts right here at home.
100%. We need to connect those dots between these big global trade wars and the impact that they're having on our communities, our families, even our own lives.
Yeah.
And the more informed we are,
Yeah.
the better equipped we're going to be to navigate these, very turbulent times and ultimately to make these really conscious decisions about our spending habits, our political engagement, and even just our own personal choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it can be very easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of all of this, the
Hmm.
complexity of this issue.
Yep.
But it's important to remember that we're not powerless.
That's right. We can choose to be informed, engaged citizens, and we can use our voices, we can use our actions to advocate for, a world that's more just, a world that's more equitable, a world that works for everyone.
Well said. I think this deep dive has, it's definitely been heavy, but it's also been incredibly insightful. It's a stark reminder that the personal and the political are so closely intertwined and, ultimately that our choices really do matter.
I couldn't agree more. This trade war, it's like a wake-up call. It's a reminder that we can't afford to be complacent. We can't afford to be indifferent. We need to be active participants in shaping the future that we want to see, both for ourselves and, for generations to come.
Absolutely. So I guess the big question is, what can we do?
Hmm.
Where do we go from here?
I think it starts with a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
We need to move beyond this kind of us versus them mentality
Yeah.
and recognize that we're all in this together.
Yep.
Our fates are intertwined.
It's all about recognizing our shared humanity
That's right.
and understanding that, the well-being of others is ultimately tied to our own well-being.
Exactly. It's about cultivating empathy and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about recognizing that the consequences of this, they extend far beyond national borders, they extend beyond economic indicators, and they ultimately impact real people.
It's about seeing the human faces behind the statistics.
Mm.
And it's about understanding that our actions, or even our inactions,
Yeah.
can have real consequences for other people's lives.
We need to, foster this sense of global citizenship where we see ourselves as part of this larger human community
Yeah.
and that we're ultimately responsible for each other's well-being.
And I think this trade war, with all of its, we've talked about all these dramatic impacts, it really does present this opportunity for us to kind of step back, reevaluate our priorities, and, really commit to building a world that's more just, more equitable, and, ultimately more sustainable.
It's a chance to learn from the mistakes that we've made,
Yeah.
strengthen those bonds of cooperation and create a future where the benefits of, globalization are shared more equally.
Well said.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really it's been a roller coaster of emotions,
Hmm.
from concern to frustration to, a sense of hope and even possibility.
It's been a privilege to kind of explore these issues with you
Mm,
and to share our insights with everyone listening.
absolutely. And, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I don't leave our listeners with a question,
Okay.
something to really ponder, as they continue exploring this topic.
Yeah.
And that question is this. In a world that's grappling with, all of these really dramatic consequences of these trade wars and these fractured alliances, what does responsible global citizenship really look like? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for the average person?
That's an excellent question. And honestly, it's one that each of us needs to really grapple with, both individually and collectively. And the answers are going to be diverse, they're going to be complex, but the very act of, engaging with this question,
Yeah.
that's a step in the right direction.
It really does feel like we're at this turning point,
Yeah.
Like the choices that we make today, they're going to have these ripple effects for years to come.
Yeah, there's no question about it. The actions or inactions of governments and businesses and, individuals, it's all going to determine the course of this trade war and ultimately the lasting impact on our world.
And this deep dive has really highlighted just how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
The economies, the societies, even individual lives. It's a little sobering to think about.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder that we're all in this together, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, this trade war really is a stark illustration of how deeply intertwined our fates really are. What might seem like just this distant political dispute can actually have these very real and tangible consequences on our daily lives, on our communities, and on our future as a whole.
It's a call to action, I think. It's a reminder that we can't afford to just sit back and be passive observers. We need to engage with these really complex issues. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to advocate for solutions that actually put human well-being and global cooperation first.
Absolutely. We need to shift our focus away from, narrow self-interest
Right.
and actually move toward a more holistic understanding of our interconnected world.
Yeah.
And that means recognizing the shared challenges that we face and really working together to find solutions that work for everybody, not just a select few.
It's about, embracing that sense of global citizenship
Hmm.
where we recognize our shared humanity,
Hmm.
and we act with compassion and with responsibility towards one another.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that the well-being of others is ultimately tied to our own well-being, and
Right.
we need to move beyond, that us versus them mentality.
Yeah.
We need to embrace a much more inclusive and collaborative approach to addressing these global challenges.
And I think this trade war, with all of its dramatic impacts, it's actually presenting us with this unique opportunity to kind of step back, reevaluate our priorities,
Hmm.
and really commit to building a world that's more just, that's more equitable, and ultimately more sustainable for everyone.
It's a chance for us to learn from our mistakes,
Yeah.
to strengthen those bonds of cooperation, and, create a future where the benefits of globalization are shared, more fairly.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
This deep dive it's been a roller coaster, a roller coaster of emotions. You go from concern and frustration to, even a sense of hope and possibility.
It has been, and it's been a real privilege to kind of explore these complex issues with you and to share our perspectives and insights with everyone listening.
And a huge thank you to you for listening to the deep dive. We hope this has given you a deeper understanding of the impacts of this trade war. And, most importantly, we hope this has inspired you to engage with these issues in a meaningful way. Remember, knowledge is power, and, informed action is the key to creating a better future for everyone. So until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.